The official story is that I had a breakdown, a psychotic break precipitated by stress and extreme isolation. That's what the university's official report says. It's a neat, tidy explanation that allows my colleagues to sleep at night, to continue believing the world is a known, quantifiable place. It allows them to dismiss the frantic, near incoherent story I told the sheriff's deputy, the one about the thing in the woods. They gave me a medical leave of absence, recommended therapy, and quietly shelved my research proposal. I was a promising ornithologist, a rising star in my field. Now, I'm a cautionary tale. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that deep in the tangled, rain-drenched forests of the Olympic Peninsula, something ancient and utterly terrifying is walking. It had been my dream assignment. 6 months of solo fieldwork, studying the nesting habits of the marbled murrelet, a reclusive seabird that bizarrely nests in the tops of old-growth conifers miles from the ocean. My base was a remote research cabin, a relic from a 1970s forestry survey, airlifted into a small subalpine meadow and left to the mercy of the elements. It was 20 miles from the nearest logging road and 100 miles from anything you could call a town. For me, it was paradise. I've always been more comfortable with the company of trees than people. The quiet solitude of the deep woods is a symphony to me. The sigh of wind through thousand-year-old firs, the chattering of a hidden stream, the distant tap-tap-tap of a pileated woodpecker. These are the sounds that soothe my soul. The first month was idyllic. I set up my observation posts, rigged my cameras, and spent my days hiking through a cathedral of green, my neck craned upwards, searching for the elusive nests. At night, I'd sit on the cabin's small porch, a mug of tea steaming in my hands, and watch the stars blaze to life in a sky untainted by city lights. I was completely, utterly alone, and I was happy. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. So subtle, in fact, that I dismissed it at first. I'd been out checking a series of audio recorders I had placed in a particularly dense stand of Sitka spruce. As I was swapping out the memory cards, I noticed a smell. It was a rank, musky odor like a wet dog mixed with garbage and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. It was strong, clinging to the damp air like a shroud. I wrinkled my nose, assuming it was a dead animal nearby, perhaps a deer taken by a cougar. But as I scanned the area, I saw no signs of a kill. No scavenger birds circling, no tracks, nothing. The smell was just fur. Potent and out of place. I made a note in my journal, unidentified carrion odor, strong, and thought nothing more of it. A few nights later I was jolted from sleep by a sound. It was a loud, percussive thump against the side of the cabin. My heart leaped into my throat. I sat bolt upright in my sleeping bag, straining my ears in the profound silence. My first thought was a bear. They were common in the area, and I was meticulous about food storage, but a curious bear might still come investigating. I grabbed my flashlight and the canister of bear spray I kept by my bunk, my hands trembling slightly. I waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own pulse. Eventually, convincing myself it was probably just a heavy branch falling from one of the massive firs that surrounded the clearing, I lay back down, though sleep remained elusive for the rest of the night. The incidents began to accumulate, each one a small, jagged piece of a puzzle I couldn't comprehend. I started finding tracks. I'm an experienced tracker, trained to identify the prints of every creature in these woods, from the delicate tread of a marten to the heavy shuffle of a black bear. These were different. They were massive, for one thing. At least 17 inches long, shaped vaguely like a human foot, but far broader, with a pronounced mid-tarsal break, an anatomical feature associated with apes, allowing for more flexibility. They were bipedal. I found a line of them pressed deep into the mud near a creek bed, the stride between them an impossible 6 feet. My scientific mind scrambled for an explanation. A known animal? A hoax? Could a bear walking on its hind legs for a prolonged distance create such a track? No, the morphology was all wrong. The weight distribution was wrong. It was the track of a bipedal animal of immense weight and size, an animal that had no right to exist. I photographed them, measured them, even made a plaster cast of the clearest print, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and a strange thrilling curiosity. Who was I going to show it to? My colleagues? They'd laugh me out of the profession. I was alone with this impossible evidence. Then came the vocalizations. I had my audio recorders running 24/7, hoping to capture the murrelet's call. One night, while reviewing the previous day's recordings, I heard it. It started around 3 a.m., a low, mournful whoop, that echoed through the valley. It was answered by another from a different ridge. They weren't the calls of any known animal in North America. Not a wolf, not a cougar, not an elk. The sounds were complex, modulated, filled with an eerie, intelligent quality. They had the power and lung capacity of something huge. I played the recording over and over, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The forest I knew, the one I had studied and loved, was beginning to feel like a thin veneer over something much older and wilder. My sanctuary was becoming a cage. The feeling of being watched started to become a constant companion. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck as I hiked, the unnerving feeling that I was thus alone, even in the most remote, inaccessible areas. I'd stop suddenly and scan the dense undergrowth, but see nothing but shifting shadows and whispering ferns. The forest symphony had changed. The birds seemed quieter, the squirrels scarcer. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. The psychological toll was immense. My scientific objectivity began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing primal fear. I started talking to myself, my voice sounding small and fragile in the immense quiet. I double-checked the locks on the cabin door a dozen times a night. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was I going crazy? Was the isolation finally getting to me, making me manufacture a monster out of shadows and strange sounds? I clung to that possibility. A mental breakdown was terrifying, but it was understandable. The alternative was not. The event that pushed me over the edge from fear into sheer terror happened about a week later. I was hiking back to the cabin at dusk, following a faint game trail along a steep ridge. The air was still and heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. Above me, the sky was a bruised purple. That's when I saw the tree break. It was a young Douglas fir, about 8 inches in diameter, and it had been snapped in two, about 9 feet off the ground. The top half was twisted at a bizarre angle and woven into the branches of a neighboring tree. The break was fresh. I could see the pale, splintered wood and smell the sharp, clean scent of sap. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. No wind could have done this. A tree of that size and flexibility would bend, not snap like a matchstick. And the height, a bear couldn't reach that high, let alone exert the kind of torsional force required to twist the trunk like that. It was a display of impossible strength, a message, a territorial marking. My blood ran cold. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. I was being warned. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't take my eyes off the dense wall of trees around me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a tiny fragile thing in a world of giants. I practically ran the last mile back to the cabin, bursting into the clearing, gasping for breath. And that's when I saw that my little sanctuary had been violated. The heavy wooden picnic table that sat in front of the cabin had been flipped completely upside down. The heavy-duty cooler I used for food storage, the kind advertised as grizzly-proof, had been smashed to pieces, its contents strewn across the ground. But it wasn't just smashed. It looked like it had been crushed by an immense weight. The thick plastic shattered into jagged shards, and on the cabin door there were 4 long, deep gouges, splintering the thick wood, as if something had raked its fingers down in a fit of pique. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized me. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit it in the lock. I scrambled inside, slammed the heavy door shut, and bolted it. I leaned against it, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged sobs. It knew I lived here. It had come to my home. It had touched my things. The fragile illusion of safety was shattered. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat on my bunk, a small hand axe clutched in my white-knuckled grip, and I listened. The silence of the forest was gone. The night was filled with sounds. It started with whoops and howls, closer this time, much closer. They seemed to come from all sides, a terrifying chorus of unseen giants communicating in the dark. Then came the footsteps, heavy, bipedal, thump, 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 circling the cabin, so heavy I could almost feel the vibrations through the wooden floor. It would pace the perimeter of the clearing, then retreat into the woods, only to begin again from a different direction. It was a deliberate, calculated torment. Then the rock throwing began. Small pebbles at first, pinging off the metal roof, then larger stones, thudding against the wooden walls with sickening force. One hit the plexiglass window with a crack that sent a web of fractures across its surface. I yelped and scrambled away from it, crouching in the center of the small room, making myself as small as possible. I felt like a trapped animal, helpless and utterly at the mercy of the monster outside. Hours crawled by. The psychological assault was relentless. The creature, or creatures. Outside began to make other sounds, low, guttural growls that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, and a strange chattering sound, like a series of clicks and pops. It was intelligent, it was curious, and it was angry. Sometime before dawn, the most terrifying thing of all happened. It began to mimic sounds. First, it was a perfect imitation of a deer bleeding in distress, then chillingly the sound of a woman crying softly. The sound was so convincing, so filled with despair, that for a split second my rational mind faltered. It was a lure, a predatory trick of unimaginable cruelty. It was demonstrating an intelligence that was far beyond that of any mere animal. It was studying the It was learning. As the first, faint hint of gray light began to silhouette the jagged peaks to the east, the sound stopped. Just like that. The silence that fell was more profound and menacing than the noise that had preceded it. I stayed huddled on the floor, shaking, until the sun was fully up, painting the fractured window with the golden light of a new day. I had to leave. I couldn't stay another night. I was coming apart, my sanity fraying like an old rope. I packed only the essentials, my research notes, the plaster cast, my satellite phone, and the audio recordings. I didn't care about the rest of the equipment. I just had to get out. I unbolted the door, my hand axe held tightly in front of me, and peered outside. The clearing was a wreck. Rocks and debris were scattered everywhere, and in the soft, damp earth, the tracks were there. Not just one set, but two, maybe three. They were all around the cabin, deep and clear in the morning light. They had been just feet from me all night. With my heart in my mouth, I began the 20-mile hike out. Every step was an agony of fear. The forest, once my beloved sanctuary, was now a place of horror. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow, sent my heart into a frantic gallop. I felt like I was being escorted, watched by unseen eyes from the impenetrable green walls on either side of the trail. I didn't stop, not for water, not for rest. I just pushed forward, fueled by a primal need to escape. I was about 5 miles from the logging road, scrambling down a steep, scree-covered slope, when I slipped. My ankle twisted beneath me with a sickening, audible snap. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot out my leg. I cried out, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. I collapsed onto the loose rock, cradling my leg. It was broken, badly. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. I was immobile, a sitting duck. I fumbled for my satellite phone, my fingers slick with sweat. I prayed for a signal. The small screen lit up, 1 bar. It would have to be enough. I dialed the emergency number for the county sheriff, my voice a broken, trembling whisper as I explained my situation, my location, my injury. The dispatcher's calm voice was a lifeline in an ocean of terror. They were sending a helicopter. But it would take time, hours maybe. Stay put, she said. Keep the line open if you can. The next 2 hours were a waking nightmare. I sat propped against a rock, my broken leg throbbing, my eyes scanning the oppressive wall of trees that surrounded the scree slope. The sun began to dip below the ridge, plunging the valley into shadow. The temperature dropped. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard it, a single heavy footstep from the trees just above me. A branch cracked. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly I lifted my head, and there it was. It was standing just at the edge of the tree line, partially obscured by the shadows of a massive cedar. The word big is wholly inadequate. It was colossal. It had to be over 8 feet tall, its frame immensely broad and powerful, covered in thick, matted, dark brown hair. Its arms were long, hanging almost to its knees, ending in huge man-like hands. Its head was conical, set directly upon its massive shoulders with no discernible neck. But it was the face that will haunt you until the day I die. It was not the face of an ape. It was something more. The brow was heavy and sloping, the nose broad and flat, the mouth a wide, thin line. But the eyes were dark, deep-set, and filled with a terrifying, undeniable intelligence. They were not the simple, reactive eyes of an animal. They were aware, they were ancient, and they were staring directly at me. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, I was completely paralyzed by a fear so profound it was almost a religious experience. This was no missing link. This was something else entirely. A parallel branch of humanity, a relic of a wilder world, hidden in the last deep places of the earth. It took a single step out of the shadows and onto the scree. Its weight shifted, a shower of small rocks that tumbled down the slope. The sheer power in its form was breathtaking. It tilted its head, its dark eyes studying me with an unnerving curiosity. There was no malice in its gaze, not then, just a calm, assessing intelligence. It was trying to figure out what I was, this strange, small, broken creature in its territory. Then, from far down the valley, came the faint rhythmic whomp 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 of helicopter blades. The creature's head snapped up, its gaze turning towards the sound. The expression on its face changed. The curiosity was gone, replaced by something else. A flicker of what looked like anger? Annoyance? Its lips peeled back from its teeth in a silent snarl. It let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground. It took another step towards me. My mind screamed. This was it. It was going to kill me, to silence me before the noisy intrusion from my world arrived. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, for the crushing force of those massive hands. But it never came. When I dared to open my eyes, it was gone. It had vanished back into the forest as silently as a ghost, leaving behind only the deep impression of its foot in the loose rock and the lingering, musky scent of its presence. The rescue team found me 15 minutes later, suffering from exposure, shock, and a compound fracture of the tibia. As they airlifted me out, I looked down at the endless, dark green canopy of the forest. It looked so peaceful, so beautiful. But I knew what it was hiding. My story was dismissed, of course. The tracks were explained away as bear prints distorted by the mud. The sounds, I was told, were probably owls or cougars, their calls warped by distance and my overwrought imagination. The damage to the cabin was attributed to a particularly aggressive bear. My encounter on the ski slope? A hallucination, brought on by pain, fear, and hypothermia. It was all so simple, so rational, so wrong. I never went back. I left the university. I live in the city now, surrounded by the noise and the concrete that I once despised. I am afraid of the quiet. I am afraid of the dark. I am afraid of the woods. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is asleep, I think I can hear it. A low, mournful whoop, carried on the wind, a sound that doesn't belong in this world of steel and glass. A reminder of what is still out there, walking in the deep, dark places, where our maps have blank spaces. They call me crazy, but I know the truth. We are not alone on this continent. We are not the apex predator. And our world is much, much smaller than we think.